Hello world! Today we have a guest who oversees her company's legal matters and is responsible for ensuring that the technology, practices in place, and procedures meet global privacy requirements. With data and privacy at the forefront of many of our minds these days, as well as GDPR, we're excited to finally sit down with the woman involved in developing and setting industry standards and who is regularly presenting on privacy, legal, and policy-related challenges facing the online advertising industry today and what it means for us marketers. So please welcome Julia Shullman, General Counsel and Chief Privacy Officer at TripleLift, to the show. Julia, are you ready to get radically transparent with me?
Hi, Jen. I am. I'm so excited.
Fantastic. So listen, this is, everybody listening in, we're all marketing, sales, but everything we do, especially when it's online and digital, is centered around making sure that we're following the right regulations. Before I dive into some of my questions, I do want to understand a little bit more about you. And I was hoping you might be able to give us a brief, because I know I've definitely looked at your LinkedIn profile, but a brief professional journey of how you got started or how you found yourself at TripleLift.
Sure. So, TLDR, I basically raised my hand and took all the opportunities that were put in front of me. But I started off my career as an M&A associate, so working on deals with like Trump and energy private equity firms, so not technology at all, but I knew I wanted to be in-house. I wanted to be deep and embedded in the strategy of the companies that I was supporting, and you just don't get that at a law firm. So I ended up in-house doing some M&A, and the company that I was with had some technology, and I actually really enjoyed working on it. So I got a job at AppNexus, which was acquired by AT&T a couple of years ago. And I started digging in and supporting our product. And at that point, the company was in this transformative moment. We were acquiring a number of different companies. We launched a new publisher ad server. We launched header bidding, the consortium that controls all of that today. So prebid.js, most publishers are using that to actually manage all their supply partners, so all their SSPs. And I kind of fell into privacy. It was a really big and important issue in all of our negotiations and all of our product work. And our head of privacy at the time left. And so our CEO and general counsel kind of tapped me because they realized it wasn't a compliance issue for ad tech company. It was actually core to our strategy and our ability to continue to operate and to ensure that our clients could continue to operate. So here I am at TripleLift now and kind of overseeing both legal and privacy. So it's a great opportunity. It's a good company to be at.
It sounds like it. And listen, I'm sure there's no shortage, and my eye is tearing. I think I have a little bit of an allergy. So if you're watching the YouTube version of this clip, I am not emotional over the journey. I just seem to.
You're just so emotional.
So emotional. So give me one moment to wipe that tear. But what I'm actually really curious about is, thinking about what you do and kind of in the legal department. I mean, for me, if you were to toss me over to legal, I probably wouldn't sleep a wink. But what I'd be curious to know in our industry is what's keeping you up at night professionally these days?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I laughed as I was preparing for the podcast because I've actually behind the scenes I mentor other CEOs in the marketing space who just want some extra help when they think through, privacy, data regulation, public policy on their businesses, and smaller companies, and they can't, frankly, afford to have a team like we have. And one of them actually asked me, how do you sleep at night? Like this
Maybe that
stuff
should
is
be the
so
question.
complex, and
Do you sleep?
there's so many there's so many regulators and there's so many investigations, and I'm so nervous, that we're going to get caught up in a PR scandal. And I said, you know what, like you need to feel comfortable that the world we live in right now is really gray, and you need to have a plan, and you need to have a story and a narrative for why you're doing what you're doing. But no one is ever going to have a completely perfect, tied up in a bow solution to everything we're dealing with these days, because there's no perfect answer. So frankly, the privacy and legal side of my job don't keep me up. I've lived through a lot, being an M&A attorney, being in-house at an ad tech company, talking to regulators, kind of dealing with litigation, dealing with all those issues. You get comfortable with it, which is fun. But what actually keeps me up at night is motivating my team and keeping the company educated and excited about all these privacy and identity and other issues that are coming our way.
Do people really get excited about new regulations coming out? Or because I know, like, when I heard about GDPR for the first time, I was not so excited. I was more nervous. But from a lawyer point of view, I mean, does your team, when something new is happening, is that where the fun's at?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly interesting from a legal perspective because things are changing all the time. And we hire, at least on my team, I hire folks that actually relish and want to be at a company where things are super fast paced. We get to influence regulations. We get to influence the future of the internet behind the scenes. But actually what I relish being at is a company where privacy and identity is not a legal and a compliance issue. Like, we have an entire cross-functional team across product, engineering, revenue, marketing, you name it, who are looking at these issues, certainly from a compliance perspective, but are actually looking at them and saying, how can we take advantage of this, right? Like, how can we create a product and how can we create services that actually benefit our clients and therefore benefit us? So it's a highly strategic matter, and that's the fun part of it.
That's an interesting perspective I've actually never heard before. And I'm just trying to kind of understand a little bit, right? Because as a B2B marketer myself, and for the B2B marketers who are listening in, how realistic would you say is it for us to use legitimate business interest as the legal basis, for example, for holding customer contact data? Because I think from a B2B marketing perspective, right, we're constantly asking to gate or not to gate forms. How can we store data? Is it ethical? What does that look like?
Yeah, and it's a good question, and I'd flip it on its head a little bit and say it's not about holding that data. It's about taking a step back and thinking about how that data is used.
Okay.
And so for certain uses, so you look at it from consumer perspective, and this is how most privacy professionals would tell you to look at this. Take a step back, and as a consumer yourself, when you're going to a brand's website, or to your point, you're filling out a form to access this podcast or whatnot, what do you actually think is happening with your data? And I think marketers have to take a step back and say, use cases that make sense to a consumer and that are reasonable and rational, like fraud, security detection, communicating with your customers, sending them potential offers, discounts, whatnot. Like, those are pretty reasonable, but there's probably some other use cases, frankly, some of the advertising related use cases where maybe their data is being used to build and enhance profiles on them that are going to be used across various websites, and consumers don't understand that that's what's happening. That might not be okay from a legitimate interest perspective. So it's really about what's the data and how's it being used. And it's not a like all or nothing. It's a bit more nuanced and really thinking about those nuances.
Okay. And there's a lot of, I think, in this term, I know in the Trump era as well, there's this term, right, fake news. And I think there's a lot of rumors, a lot of fake news going around about data privacy and regulation. Would you be able to bust maybe some of the myths around maybe some of the most known kind of fake news when it comes to data privacy and regulation, or how people think their data is being used when it's not really being used that way? And then how that fake news may actually be impacting B2B business activities?
Oh, I love this question. So, unpacking a little bit, I think the way that I would roll kind of all of the fake news around data privacy and regulation, unfortunately, is into a bucket of people certainly don't understand what's going on, right? And so they put all marketers, they put all advertising technology, and they put all platforms into the same bucket and assume all of us are doing the same thing and it's all bad. And of course, that's not the case, right? Like, your job is making sure that people are getting access to the content they want and they're seeing the content they want. So I think it's twofold from there. Is one, just making sure that people actually understand the difference between a Facebook and an Amazon and a Google, and then a marketer and the various technology players they're using and what they are and aren't doing, right? Like, we're not all ad tech companies. We actually don't have access to directly identifiable data versus, Facebook or Amazon, where you're a logged in user. Of course, you've got a ton of data on these various users. But the second myth I would bust is this this unfortunate myth that we hear where everyone just kind of puts privacy and identity again into a compliance bucket. And they're like, oh, we'll just throw this off to the lawyers. They're going to solve this problem for us. And it's just contracts and, like all that stuff, which is fine. It's part of the job. But the reality and, the fact that most of the regulators today are going after the big players and they're not going after small players. So I think smaller players are saying, why are we spending all this time and money doing this? Yeah. No one really cares, right? This is really just about big tech. But what people should be saying, and especially B2B marketers, is how is big tech, how are Google, how are Amazon, how are Facebook, how are Apple responding to these regulators and the regulations? Because what they're doing is they're changing their technology, they're changing the type of data that they're giving customers, marketers access to, and they're changing marketers' ability to do certain things with their own data. And so it frankly, we have to comply and we're going to try our best to do that. But what really needs to happen is we need to work with our customers and our customers need to work with us to understand how things are going to look 2, 3, 5 years out and make sure that marketers, publishers, content providers are able to ensure they don't get hurt by that. Their business models aren't hurt. They don't lose leverage vis-a-vis their consumers and the data that those consumers are okay giving them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what do you think, is the best way to communicate all of this between brand and consumer, brand and customer? Is it something, that a B2B brand should openly put like on their website, or is a box when you fill out a web form, a little box that you check, yes, I comply, or yes, I volunteer my data, if you will. Is that sufficient? I mean, what would you say is the best way to have these conversations?
With the consumer. So, I think you're never going to get the consumer, frankly, to fully understand what's going on. So I actually think there's 2 pieces to this. Certainly, it's trying to be as clear with consumers as you can. And I do think pop-ups that kind of allow consumers to go down a journey that explains what's going on. If they want to, they should have the ability to fairly easily and in plain language understand the journey of their profile and their data and what a marketer or a technology platform is doing with that data. Not everyone's going to take advantage of that. The second piece is making sure that as a brand, you're actually working with your technology providers to, number one, understand what's going on. Stuff is confusing. And so you've got to make sure you're communicating it properly in the first place. Yeah. And number 2 is working with these technology providers, frankly, to up-level and change the way things are working generally. Because the reason we're in the spot we're in is that regulators and activists think we're not doing a good job. We're not taking care of consumer data. We're not being transparent. We're pulling the wool over consumers' eyes. And I think we need to say we have done a bad job collectively as an industry, and up-level it. And I don't mean continue to do the same thing that we've all been doing. I mean doing a better job of explaining what's going on, but also changing the underlying technology and practices in the first place, which is an uphill battle, to say the least.
Yeah, I can imagine that is quite an uphill battle. And, in your opinion, kind of speaking about that uphill battle and, I feel like that will be a long journey and a fighting the good fight, if you will. But what do you think the future of identity or the lack of it in advertising looks like, let's say in the next year or 5 years or 10 years?
Yeah, I think we're going to end up in a dual track position. And what I mean by that is I think we're going to have way less identified traffic, right? Because most traffic that is going to have an identity associated with it is going to need to be logged in over time, or a consumer is actually going to have to provide their data to actually allow it to be used in the first place. And then the other track is going to be much more sophisticated contextual uses of data. So those are kind of the 2 big things that I believe are going to happen. I also think underlying the identity world, so underlying that logged in world or that consumer provided data world, is going to be massive consolidation of players, which has already been happening, right? It's going to be mainly the big technology providers with a couple of other trusted companies. And I also think there's going to be a major change in the underlying data infrastructure generally. And so today, we all have our data siloed. You all probably have a number of different vendors, your CRM, your DMP, whatnot. And that data sits there and then it has to get transferred among a bunch of different companies, which is really what the activists and regulators don't like, because they don't trust all these companies having that data transferred back and forth. And so there are a ton of companies right now working on technology that would allow that data to be used and actually analyzed without it moving, and with better consumer controls on top of it and better customer controls on top of it. Meaning, as a brand, you could tell your technology provider, this is the only way you can use my data. Now you can't really confirm that they're actually complying with that request without going in and auditing them. In the future, there's going to be infrastructure that's going to allow you as a brand to say, this is all you can do with it. And you set those controls, and those controls dictate the uses. Consumers will be able to do that. And then the data won't even leave these silos, and it'll be more properly processed by all the various technology vendors. Pretty cool stuff. And not many people are talking about it.
Just like, I've actually never heard that, and just hearing that for the first time, it actually goes like, okay, that does make a lot of sense. But from a marketing point of view, where my mind is actually going right now is, it's interesting, right? Because especially 2020, right? You have this year where suddenly these buzzwords in marketing have been popping up, like authenticity, and your consumers want personalization more than they've ever wanted personalization before. So in some ways, I think for marketing, it's quite challenging, because you have all of these data regulations, and right, like you were saying, like, how are you using the data? Well, a lot of times us marketers are using the data to take a look at, to better understand, our buyer personas and who our customers are, and the age demographic. So then when it comes to understanding and protecting that data, which I think we're all here for and want, it almost makes me wonder what will become the job of a marketer in that aspect, and how are we going to be able to provide those authentic and really personalized journeys, those customer journeys, with what seems like will be such limited data. And I don't know if there's an answer to that, but that's kind of where like my mind in like 1 year and 5 years and 10 years go, like, how are we going to give the consumers what they want in terms of authenticate or of personalization, but with almost like less information about them? So,
right.
Thought for myself.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's such a challenge, and I think everyone's really nervous right now. But those of us that sit at this intersection between legal, public policy, strategy, and technology, which is why I love my job so much, because I see all of it and I get to influence all of it, is telling folks that actually there are going to be great future technologies that are going to solve for this. So you're going to have your authenticated data, you're going to have your unauthenticated, and you're going to have a better experience, and consumers ultimately will, I think, be happier. And as long as you've got a good relationship with them, it's actually going to work a lot more seamlessly.
That makes me more calm. So listen, I want to ask, as you shared at the beginning, and I think you're spot on, a lot of the, I would say, small business, mid-market, the teams that don't necessarily have the ability to have legal in-house or such a large legal team in-house, where do you go to stay updated in terms of, privacy regulations, or what's in the news, or even like, if there's any sort of, I don't even know if this exists, but like legal cliff notes where the average person could go to try to understand and break down some of these very interesting regulations to make sure they're adhering to the rules correctly?
Yeah. I will say,
or do we just give you a call, reach out on LinkedIn?
Well, you're happy, you're welcome to do that. But yeah, frankly, there's, between all this misinformation that you're pointing to, and then different clashing commercial interests, to be totally frank, one myth that I did not bring up is, unfortunately, there's a big business behind privacy, right? And that's great. I hope that we're going to see good things come from it. But lawyers, technology providers, like, they're selling that scared technology. They're selling their services to make people kind of scared to use their services,
right? Fear sells.
It crushes me to see those, those sales emails and talk to various vendors, and a lot of times outside attorneys, who some of them are amazing, and others who, they're going to make their money off of scaring people and making them pay more money. So what I think, people like you and others that are listening to this podcast should do is find a couple of trusted sources who are less conflicted. We all have different commercial interests, and can synthesize and pull in a lot of different channels of information. So I I look at very good privacy professionals. And so there's a couple good ones out there, like the Future of Privacy Forum, which is led by this amazing guy, Jules Polonetsky, who was the first chief privacy officer of DoubleClick, which was acquired by Google and is basically the underlying infrastructure for most of Google's ad tech stack. He was one of the OGs. Like he was the guy who started creating all these self-regulatory frameworks. I talked to a huge peer set across the industry who are in-house and dealing with all these issues day in and day out at marketers, ad tech, new technology stacks, even fintech and other spaces that we can help learn from. I look at the International Association of Privacy Professionals, and then I also sit in industry working groups and tech working groups to make sure I'm watching all of this. So no one's going to be able to do all of that, right? And we have a whole team that helps me do that, from product to tech to legal. So I think you should look out for a couple of good newsletters that a lot of people, our company included, are starting to spin up because there's so much FUD out there.
Yeah. Okay, those were super helpful. Now, I want to take a moment and kind of shift from the legal hat for a moment and get a little personal. So with that, right, we all know that failure is an inevitable part of success. And you are quite the woman of the hour, if you will, but also anyone who goes to check out Julia's professional background, you'll know you're in good hands. But what I'm curious to know about is if you could maybe share a time in your life professionally when maybe you thought you had failed, or maybe you were reviewing a contract and missed something, but in actuality it was an entire learning experience or helped you get where you are today. It wasn't actually a giant fail, but maybe at the time you thought, oh my gosh, oops.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's countless moments because anyone who works at a tech startup will say, like, the only way to get better is to constantly be stretched and out of your depth and terrified for your life and working on things you've never done before. But if you know how to tackle something new, right, that's the opportunity there. But a good example of a defining moment for me was actually the first year after I took over privacy at Nexus. And I was kind of in between the legal realm, so to speak, and also being asked to weigh in on and help lead our product and strategy efforts around our response to GDPR. And I worked for some of the best in the business, including Brian O'Kelly, right, who was one of the godfathers of ad tech. And I was constantly being asked for these simple solutions, and I was constantly being asked to step up and get outside of my legal swim lane and talk about how these regulations were going to impact future regulation, our technology, our clients, what we could do to take advantage of it. And I would put these roadmaps and solutions in front of people, and I struggled with how to marry kind of the policy and legal stuff with the product side of the house. And I feel like I was just constantly being told I was not delivering what I was being asked for. And that my ideas were crazy, and there's no way that any of this stuff was going to happen. And it was a tough year, right? Like I was just constantly testing out different ways of operating and figuring out how to better work with engineers and executives and product folks and legal folks and influencing industry solutions. And then, kind of coming out of that first year, most of my predictions came true. It was exactly the way that the industry moved. It was exactly what I had predicted, and people finally got it, and I felt like I'd finally made a breakthrough. And if I had just kind of caved earlier and just said, "Oh yeah, let's just do something more simple," or "I'm not able to do this," you need to put someone in this position who's a more traditional product or strategy person, I wouldn't have learned all of those different pivots and ways of influencing and educating people. It was the most defining moment of my career, and I wouldn't give it up to save my life, but it was a very, very challenging period.
Thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of us find ourselves in those kind of shoes where we're kind of knee deep into something that maybe we don't have full confidence in, but to kind of keep going and keep fighting the good fight, if you will. I want to ask now, I have two last questions for you. And one is, what is one thing that you wish B2B marketers knew about your role that maybe marketers, and I know you work with quite a few, departments and teams, but what's one thing you wish we knew about your world?
So actually the number one thing I wish brands and marketers knew is that by putting privacy in the hands of their legal and compliance teams and not marrying that with the business folks and technologists who actually understand how advertising functions and how they use ad tech, they are digging themselves a hole that's going to be really hard to come out of. And what I mean by that is we've got brand and agency marketing legal teams coming to us and asking us to sign up contracts and agree to things that we literally technically can't do, and that are going to put brands, marketers, and their technology providers in a weaker position vis-a-vis the Googles, the Facebooks, the Amazons of the world. And so if brands and marketers want to have choice of vendors and they want to have more flexibility to use their data for marketing, and you were telling me that's one of your number one concerns, we need to create better, tighter partnerships where we're being realistic about what we can and can't do and how we can strategically work together to provide long-term technology solutions that regulators can get behind, because they're good and maybe they're better than what regulators are dictating, but they work in a different way.
I like that. I really like that. All right, last question. It's a fun one. So what I think many of our guests love about this show and the feedback we've gotten, right, is that you can go pretty much anywhere online, as you know, and do as much research on somebody as you can and dig up a lot of good stuff. And I think what's interesting as well is that on LinkedIn, many of us, we have a very professional profile, but perhaps who we are on LinkedIn is not always who we are in real life. And I was curious if you might be able to share a fun fact or something about yourself that we cannot learn from your LinkedIn profile.
Great question. I think, a fun fact about me is I'm an American archer. So it's like this silly little thing that started when I was at camp. And so I'm very good at, with the bow and arrow. So the Katniss Everdeen.
Okay.
And so back pre-COVID, I used to go to a couple of different archery ranges in New York City where I'm usually based. And I miss it, but it's a fun activity because it makes you focus in so hard on what you're doing that I find it to be this incredibly mind clearing activity, and it's fun. So one day when I don't have to work for a living, my future goal is to be an Olympic archer, but you got to find time to train for that. I think Gina Davis is an Olympic archer, so that's my future goal.
I love that. And, I'm just wondering, I'm just picturing you, in negotiations, if you were to just casually share that, do you think that would maybe influence the negotiation in a positive favor? Because I know if I was negotiating with someone who was an archer, I would probably do whatever they would say.
Right. So I've never thought about that, but I'm going to do that next time. And I'm going to say that Jen told me to do it and see how it goes down.
Oh, I love it. Well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time to get radically transparent with me. We had a lot of fun. We learned a lot about data, and we also learned about you. And anyone listening in, if they would like to be in touch with you or speak more data, legal, privacy, or any of the other conversations we've had today, where is the best place to go ahead and connect with you?
People can ping me on LinkedIn. Okay. I think my profile is set so that anyone can request to connect, and I'm always happy to talk to folks.
Fantastic. Julia, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks for tuning in to the Radically Transparent podcast, brought to you by Oktopost, the only social media management and employee advocacy platform architected for B2B. I'm Jennifer Gutman, your host and director of social strategy here at Oktopost. And if you love today's show, we'd love if you subscribe, rate, and give a raving review wherever you get your podcasts. For more discussion on B2B social media marketing, be sure to follow Oktopost on LinkedIn. And of course, to gain access to all our free social media marketing and employee advocacy resources, head on over to our website, www.oktopost.com. Until next time.